Welcome back, fight fans, to BTR Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Bastow, joined as always by Johnston Brown for another special episode of the podcast. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on British fighters who have gone overseas and put on an absolute masterclass of a performance to go and either win a world title or just basically stamp their authority in the boxing world and cause upsets in the process. But before we get into this episode, of course, please go and check us out on social media at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter, and the Facebook page is BTR Boxing Podcast. If you've not already subscribed to the podcast, please go and do it. Check us out on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Player FM, TuneIn. Basically, wherever you get your podcasts, go and check us out. Search BTR Boxing Podcast. And if you've not checked out all the other series that we run, we've got the Legendary Nights series, the Career Profiles series, Ones to Watch. And in May, we've got a brand new series coming into your ears. Fantastic. Not going to let anything loose just yet, but I'm telling you now, it'll blow your socks off. So, without further ado, let's get into this episode of BTR Boxing Podcast. This is The Brits Abroad. So, today's episode then, Johnston, we're looking at British fighters that have gone abroad against the odds. Sometimes not always the odds, but most of the time against the odds. And put on a performance that has left us all with mixed emotions of either elation or frustration. But ultimately, this episode is all about these British fighters that we've seen go abroad over all these years and do something so significant that it's left us a lasting memory in the sport.
Yes, and that's exactly right. I mean, they are hugely significant fights for the British boxing fans, and we've tried our best to try and pick as many as we could. We've got a very good list. I'm sure we've missed probably a couple, but I do believe we've got the significant ones in. And as you say, some of these nights are, they were before we were even born, Sean. But yet we both still find ourselves looking back on these fights, and you could feel the emotion and just from the commentary from the fighters after, and just watching the fights. And some of these guys pulled off some heroic performances, and it's just great to have a little look back on these fantastic performances for British fighters.
The way we're going to do it is we've got a set 10 fights that we put together, a collation of our opinion of 10 of the fights that we really find significant throughout boxing history. But then also we've got our notable mentions that have just fell outside our top 10, but doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't be in your top 10. And then we've also got our nearly men section as well. Obviously we've had so many great fighters travel to so many different countries and just be so close to getting that big victory abroad, but for whatever reason it's just not gone their way, or they've been robbed, or whatever it may be. So we've got a little section at the end called the nearly men, but we're going to start in no particular order with this list of the top 10 best fights involving British fighters that have gone abroad. And the first one is one that we've covered for our Legendary Nights podcast. If you've not already heard it, go and check it out. This is the tale of Prince Naseem and Kevin Kelly. Now, one that we thoroughly enjoyed doing for our Legendary Nights series, but one in which still sticks out in my mind because of how significant it was to Prince Naseem Hamed's career at this point. They've done a little documentary recently on Sky about that little trip over to the USA. It was Naseem Hamed's American debut, and an absolute stonker of a fight involving so many knockdowns that they called it the elevator fight for sure.
Yeah, Naseem, we all know how good he was over here. We all watched him on national television, and he'd become a star. Obviously, hadn't in America, and he wanted to break America, and this was obviously his American debut. And he went into that fight 28-0 against Kevin Kelly. It was 47-1-2 in Madison Square Garden in New York on the 9th of December 1997. And this, as you say, was Prince Naseem's American debut, and it almost ended in a complete disaster for him, let's be honest. I mean, we've done the Legendary Nights. We're going to go digging literally round by round, but Hamed was down in the first, down in the second, and down in the fourth. Thankfully for him, Kelly went down in the second and then twice in the fourth, which was the eventual round where we managed to stop him.
Right hand by Hamed. little slow to respond here.
You got to be careful mixing it up with Kelly because he can fight.
And that's going to be ruled a knockdown as Nassim's glove grazed the canvas. So there's the count for that. Third knockdown of Hamed by Kelly, and the Nassim advocates in the crowd boo that. Hard left hand by Kelly, and a right hand shot. Leaping right hand by the Prince.
Ooh.
And a hard left, and Kelly's down for the third time.
Whoa! Half a minute, and he is
gone.
definitely hurt.
He's
and the
for real.
fight is over.
He's for real. The Prince is for
Unbelievable
real.
punching power, George.
And it was just a brilliant fight, wasn't it? It really was just great to watch. You know, I mean, as I've mentioned before, I enjoyed watching Naz. It's only probably now where I really appreciate how good he was. At the time, I felt it was a bit of a cocky little shit, and I didn't really want to him too much. So in the back of my mind, I sort of hopefully sort of Kevin does him. I'm a British fan. End of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter. I'm always going to support our guys. So I'm glad he got the win. You know, I've matured a bit now. So yeah, legendary night. Please check it out, and it is a great one and a fantastic performance from a Brit over in America.
Yeah, it really, really was. Great, fun memories of that particular fight, and that particular period of time as well was fantastic. So we're moving on. We fast forward to 2014 on August the 16th, and it was Kell Brook finally going forth for a world title shot against Showtime Shawn Porter at the StubHub Centre in Carson. Brook, at this point in time, we knew he was world level. We knew he was capable of fighting for a world title. We just didn't know whether he was going to be able to go on and achieve that glory of getting the world title. And I think coming into that fight, he was an underdog because Shawn Porter had a great career going into the fight and probably the better resume going into the fight as well at the time against Brook's resume. So people probably felt like he could probably go over there, put a good performance on it and come away and still rise his stock as a fighter. But I don't know if there was a hell of a lot of people that truly believed that Kell Brook would go and beat Shawn Porter that night. But what came of it was obviously a fantastic night for Kell Brook as he did really well. And I think ultimately in that fight, I think his skill, his timing, his control of the tempo throughout that fight was what won him the IBF welterweight title, his first welterweight title of his career. And it was a close fight, but it was a well-deserved victory, and it was the start of what was to be a bit of a mixed bag of tricks for Kell Brook. Obviously now we're in 2020 and we've got our own sort of thoughts on where his career is at this moment in time, but back then this was huge. This was an unbelievable victory for him.
It was, and I think as well, you touched on the fact that Kell Brook obviously is still active. He's looking for this second lease. I think now, at this moment, I think that's why they sort of edges some of the other fights out there into the top 10 for me personally, because the fact is, I think now you can really understand just how much of a big win that was against Shawn Porter, considering what Shawn Porter's gone on to do. And Shawn Porter has proven that, you know, he's actually got better with age himself. So I think now in retrospect, we can actually look at this and actually realise that was a really good win. And in America as well, against an American, which is it's not easy to do. You do need to more or less win a fight convincingly. Same if an American come over here, you would need to win it sort of head and shoulders really to make sure you get that nod. And he did. And as you say, first world title. And I believe it was a very, very good win from Kell, from another Brit, and a good performance, really good performance against a good fighter like Shawn Porter, who's a spoiler.
Ladies and gentlemen, after 12 rounds of action, we go to the scorecards. Judge at ringside, Dave Paris scores the bout 114 to 114.
Dave Paris sees it a draw.
Overruled by judges Max DeLuca, he scores the bout 117 to 111.
That's a
and
shocker.
Adelaide Bird, who scores the bout 116 to 112 in favor of the winner by majority decision. And the new...
It's Kell Brook! It's Kell Brook's night!
The special one!
And just look at that reaction! Astonishing performance! And didn't he deserve it, especially over the second half of that fight, when he took over?
Absolutely. So, another one in our top 10 is one I've wrote about recently for ESBR Boxing. This was an article I really enjoyed putting together, And it was way, way back in 1980 when Alan Minter travelled to Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas to take on then champion Vito Antuofermo. Now, Vito Antuofermo was a name you may recognise if you've been listening to the podcast and the other series that we run for a while, because he has come up in the Marvin Hagler career, because he obviously fought Marvin Hagler, and he's come up in the Legendary Nights as well. So Vito Antuofermo is no mug. He was the guy that went on to get the WBA and WBC middleweight championships, then go on to defend against Marvin Hagler in Marvin Hagler's big title fight, only to come away with a split decision draw against Marvin Hagler. And the fight against Alan Minter was his next fight. So the little backstory to this one then was the Marvin Hagler fight, as we know, was a controversial draw. And there basically was controversy after the fight because you had Bob Arum, who wanted an immediate rematch, but then you had the WBC president, Jose Suleiman, who was saying, no, the next available number one contender is going to be Alan Minter. So until he's fought Alan Minter, we're not going to be defending the title against Marvin Hagler again, which was interesting when looking back on this. So going back to this particular one then, Johnston, it was before our time, but it's one we've obviously done research on and one we've looked back on and watched. Just talk me through your interpretation of this night.
Well, I think for me, like you say, Vito Antuofermo, he had that fight with Hagler. It was a dodgy decision, really. I felt Hagler probably deserved it. He got the draw. End of the day, he fought Minter. Now, it was a close fight, and it was a very close fight. And the interpretation of it was that, those that were watching and those that have seen on YouTube, I mean, the 17 writers that covered the fight, basically, I mean, 10 of them had Antuofermo winning the fight, 5 had Minter, and 2 scored it a draw. I think the problem was with the scoring where one of the officials had it 1-4-5, 1-4-3 to Antuofermo, and then 1-4-4, 1-4-1 to Minter. Now, those scorecards are not that wide. They aren't massively different. You could probably see where those scores come from. I think the problem was that Roland Dakin, who scored it 1-4-9, 1-3-7 to Minter. And it does make me laugh because you very rarely see that where a judge will, where he was a British judge, but favourably went Minter's way, which was harsh from Antuofermo. It was, end of the day, it was a very close fight. The Minter did go down in the 14th. I mean, by what I've seen and what I've read, I believe that Antuofermo probably deserves to get it. Not that it matters, Alan Minter got the win. And Vito, he got lucky against Hagler. It's just the way it goes. I think for me, the reason why it was such a big win is because Minter hadn't really fought at world level. He hadn't fought for a world title. He had fought tough opponents in Neil Griffin and Kevin Finnegan. And he also had the problem where Angelo Jacopucci actually died from injuries sustained in the ring, which was 2 years before it. Obviously got to play on his mind. But it was a good scrap from what I've seen and what I've read. And I think, it's a big win for Alan Minter to do that in Las Vegas. So, that has to make the top 10.
Well, it's one that definitely secured his legacy, winning the WBC and WBA middleweight championships, which were the 2 main championships around at that time. So essentially, he was the unified champion by beating Vito Antuofermo. So yeah, it was definitely a big win and one that definitely goes up there, and one that, as I said, I thoroughly enjoyed writing about because it was one of them fights where I think people completely forget about one of these victories like this, where a Brit has gone abroad and actually upset the apple cart. Alan Minter was an underdog in this fight. It was 4-1 on for Vito Antuofermo to actually win the fight. It was quite a given that he was going to go in there and pick up the victory. But for Alan Minter to walk away with the victory, and the judges' scorecard, the British judges' scorecard, was absolutely ludicrous. I remember looking back at that and thinking to myself, this is just the one time you want the British judges to get it right and they don't get it right, and then there's one time where they really get it wrong, but they put it in the right man's favour. It's just looking back on it, just made me laugh about when you always see these scorecards and you always get the one that's always really, really off from the other two. And this was a prime example of it. Bad. Yeah, it was. It was proper bad, that one. Proper bad one.
It's good. I hate to say it, but I mean, we've had some dodgy ones go against us, so it does make me chuckle because it's nice to have that, especially over in Vegas where you would have expected it to go the other way. So, hey, it's a win. He unified a division, so good for Alan, although he's going to lose to Hagler.
It's true, he did. He did go on to lose it to Hagler. Next up then, one that's very, very recent and is very fresh in the memory of boxing fans, is Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 2. So, as we know, 22nd of February, earlier this year, Tyson Fury goes over for the rematch to Vegas to take on Deontay Wilder, and I think many doubted Tyson Fury was going to be able to go in there and stop Wilder and knock him out. They all thought it was going to be Fury points or Wilder knockout. That was literally the general consensus about this particular fight. But what entailed was, it's the stuff legends are made of, really. I think we might not appreciate this fully now, but I think in 10 years' time, maybe when all this is said and done, the Wilders, the Furies, the Joshuas have all retired and moved on in their lives and their careers, I think that's when boxing fans will truly appreciate Tyson Fury going over to Las Vegas and absolutely pulling the pants down and destroying Deontay Wilder. I could not believe what I was watching. I knew right there watching that fight that I was watching history being made. That's how I felt.
Chance from the Fury fans of you, Big Dosser, but he's still looking for that right hand, Wilder.
And that's hard. You see Wilder there putting everything at those shots and missing, and that drains your energy also.
Oh, right hand down the middle.
Throws in.
They've thrown the towel in. The fight's all over. The fight's all over. Wow. They've thrown the towel in from the Wilder corner. And Tyson Fury is the heavyweight champion of the world. One of the most phenomenal comebacks from goodness knows where. 2 or 3 years ago, he is now top of the pile with one of the great heavyweight performances I have ever seen in 30 years covering this sport. Tyson Fury tonight was quite brilliant, and he is heavyweight champion of the world.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like you say, I suppose with time we will start to understand just how much of a good win it was. I mean, the reason why, it makes the top 10 with ease. I mean, some people probably had this, from what I heard, put their list together, and it's been almost sort of in the top 3. And the reason why it's a little bit lower for me, in my personal perspective of it, is that Wilder, although he had a 42-0 record with the one draw in that dubious first fight, I think the problem is that I think we will discover that Wilder, although he's a big puncher, he hasn't really got anything else, and I believe that because of that, if you had, say, even looking at Vito Antuofermo, for instance, if he was a heavyweight, and you was to say if you're doing pound for pound, for instance, and you look at him against Wilder, he beats Wilder because he's got the better skills. Saying that, he's still got the big punch, but I think when you put it in perspective, I don't think the opponent for Fury was as good as another opponent, which will come on later on, but. It was at the end of the day, as you say, as I'm watching it, it's a history-making fight because he beats Wilder up. He doesn't just beat him. He doesn't just knock him out with one shot. He beats him every single round, and I think that's why, as I say, with perspective, eventually we might find that this is a greater fight than it was. Maybe Wilder might come back and beat him. Who knows? But it was a magnificent night, and you can't knock Tyson Fury. It has to be in the top 10 without a shadow of doubt.
So another one then. Let's go through to another one which will probably surprise a few people, I think. And I don't think it's one that jumps out at people as one where you think, yeah, that was an upset. That was one where that comes off the tip of my tongue. So this was back in 2004, on the 30th of July, my birthday. Danny Williams, 31-3, taking on Mike Tyson, who was 50-4 at this point, and way past his best, of course. And it was in Louisville, Kentucky, so we knew at this point Mike Tyson was no longer at his destructive best, well past his peak. But the right hand at the end of the 4th round, which sent Tyson reeling into the ropes and out for the count, was still completely unexpected. No one give Danny Williams a chance here. Let's be honest, no one give Danny Williams a chance to go and beat a guy like Mike Tyson. Regardless of how past his peak Mike Tyson was, Danny Williams was only British level. So, As far as we were concerned as fight fans, we were thinking Tyson's going to walk through him regardless of how past his best he is. But yeah, he went in, Danny Williams, and he caused an upset, even at that stage of Tyson's career. And I remember watching that particular fight and been shocked at how Danny Williams was able to seemingly just dismantle Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson's punches are getting wider, and he's relying more on that winging right hand as opposed to the punches with leverage. And look at Williams not pushing him off.
A la Evander Holyfield and Lennox Lewis, and he's having his way. Firing shots. Tyson in some difficulty here in round 4. Big right hand by Danny. Oh, that one got him. Off the ropes and down to the canvas. It's Mike Tyson. It's over. Danny Williams has upset Mike Tyson in round 4.
Oh, mate, I'm with you. I mean, the reason why I would put this above the Fury, which people may look at and think, well, why would you even put that ahead of Wilder, but the Fury-Wilder fight. But for me, Danny Williams, as you say, he was a British fighter. I mean, today it's like, I suppose it's sort of like Derek Chisora knocking out, I suppose, Wilder, or even knocking out Fury, for instance. Like, probably not Fury, but or Klitschko. You know what I mean? It's that sort of feel to it where Danny Williams didn't have a chance. I mean, the fact was, I believe that Danny possibly could beat Tyson, but even on a bad night, I felt Tyson was going to beat him. But to knock him out the way he did was just remarkable, and it was completely unexpected. And I remember watching his fight 2004, like you, and I was just shocked. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. I could not believe Danny Williams did it. And everybody writ him off, and I think that's what makes this so special. You know, he wasn't a world level fighter, Danny. You know, when he did fight at world level, he got exposed, and to do that to Tyson, he was 50-4 at the time, and he had those 4 defeats. Buster Douglas, 2 to Evander Holyfield, and Lennox Lewis. You're talking about elite fighters there. And I know it's towards the end of his career. He was overweight, yes. But even then, I mean, what a great shot and what a finish from Danny Williams. So it has to be in there as one of the greatest ever performances from the lower level guys of the British fight game.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. And if you've not heard our career profile on Mike Tyson, then go and check it out on the Careers Profile podcast. We've got a full, in-depth, detailed career profile of his life outside and inside of the ring. Go and check that one out. So this is one that definitely comes up as fantastic performances from a Brit abroad, and one that would also be classed as quite a big upset. This was when Kirkland Lang went over to Michigan and fought Roberto Duran. So Roberto Duran at this point 74-3. Kirkland Lang 23, 3-1, September the 4th, 1982. The gifted one, Kirkland Lang, picked up the Ring Magazine Upset of the Year, and a brilliant performance that gets overshadowed by the below par performance from Duran. Now, considering that Duran had only lost to Esteban de Jesus, Ray Leonard and Wilfred Benitez before this, it just goes to show you that if Kirkland Lang would have been more devoted to boxing rather than booze, women and weed, he probably could have gone on to be something special. And it's a sad, bittersweet tale, really, because we talk about this fight and best British performance abroad, and you think to yourself, where is this guy now? As far as I know, this guy's struggling still.
Yeah, apparently so. He has disappeared. I don't know too much about what. So there was a documentary. I believe it was the BBC that did it, and he is a guy that he just disappeared off the scene, and it's been quite sad, really. But you know, what his performance against Duran, again, people like a bit like the Danny Williams situation where guys will knock it, but you know, Kirkland Lang, you know, it's well documented that he loved his weed, he loved his women, and it was according to a biography by a guy called Oliver Jarrett as well. He said that Lang was stoned for many of his fights and only ever took the threat of one opportunity seriously, or one opponent seriously, and that was Roberto Duran. So, you know, it does make you think if he'd have taken it a lot more seriously than he did, he could have gone on to do some great things. And he was the gifted one. He was an excellent fighter, really, really good fighter. And the fact that, Duran had a long career. I mean, you're looking at 74-3 at the time, but you look at the 3 guys again. Only Esteban Jesus, which was early in his career, he beat him, recovered to beat him twice, and then obviously the Ray Leonard in the rematch, and then Wilfred Benitez. I mean, how much of a fantastic fighter did he go on to become? So, an amazing performance from Kirkland Lang over in Detroit in '82, a year I was born, before I was born, and you know, it just shows you that you know, he had this carefree attitude, Kirkland Lang, and that was his life. He was a very laid back person. But what an amazing upset. And nobody, I mean, even Boxing News thought so little of Lang's chances that they actually bemoaned about the contest actually being allowed to take place. So that's how much of an underdog he was. People did not even want him to fight. So amazing achievement from Courtney Lang, and one that shouldn't be forgotten.
No, definitely shouldn't be forgotten. It's just a shame that he, as a person, seems to have been forgotten about. And I think something that I think we would love to explore a bit more about some of these forgotten men of boxing. That would certainly be an enjoyable sit-down podcast to go through. So, sticking with the subject at hand, and another man that crops up in our podcast yet again, in this list in particular, is Tyson Fury. Yet again, it's one that you alluded to a little bit earlier when he was 24-0 and he took on Vladimir Klitschko. He was 64-3 at the time, from the Spirit Arena in Dusseldorf, Germany, November the 28th, 2015. Vladimir, he'd been the world heavyweight champion since 2005. After that rocky sort of start to a career where he took them losses to Sanders and Brewster, and he got Stewart in his corner. Remember the late, great Emmanuel Stewart? He turned everything around. So from 2005 to 2015, he just dominated the division. And it was just the era of the Klitschko's at that point, with Vitali in and out of the game, obviously winning WBC heavyweight title and then retiring, then coming back and winning it back. It was just the era of the Klitschko's, and a difficult era for boxing fans because a lot of people really didn't like the style of Vladimir Klitschko in particular. So you got this guy who came along, this cocky Mancunian guy in Tyson Fury, who would be infamous in his post-fight interviews and his ringside interviews, and as British fight fans, we didn't know whether to love him or to hate him. And going over to Dusseldorf in Germany was a task which you would automatically think is monumentous, just because of the sole fact is that was like the Klitschko's adopted home. They're Ukrainian, but they love Germany as well, and they love being in Germany. So they always fought a lot of their fights there. So this was a case of, how's Fury going to go over to Germany, a place where it's literally the epitome of the lion's den for the Klitschko's, and how's he going to go over and beat a guy like Klitschko? He's going to have to knock him out to beat him, but that's not what entailed.
No, it wasn't. It was a dominating display from a young Tyson Fury, and he was cocksure of himself. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. You know, in the press conferences, he played the mind games with Vlad Klitschko, and I think Vlad fell into that. And you know, he just didn't throw the right hand that fight. I mean, it wasn't the best of fights. It definitely isn't a fight that necessarily I would go back and watch to enjoy. It would be more on a, you know, if you like Tyson Fury and you like what he brings to the table, then certainly go back and watch this, because it is a dominating display. I mean, Klitschko he's just a shadow of himself in there. I still can't quite figure out if there was something wrong or if Tyson Fury was just too good. I think probably a bit of both, maybe more edging towards the Tyson Fury being too good for him that night, because he was outstanding, and it was boring. It wasn't the best of performances. You know, we've already seen his best performance was against Wilder, but you know, it just shows you that Klitschko being such a dominating fighter for those 10 years, a whole decade he dominated, and Tyson Fury's a man that goes over to Germany, his own backyard, absolutely beats him to bits. I mean, every single round, more or less, I'll give to him, apart from maybe one or two. Other than that, it was a clear sweep for Tyson Fury and a magnificent performance from him.
We go to the scorecards. Cesar Ramos scores at 115 to 112. The same score from Raul Caiz Sr., 115, 112. And Ramon Cerdan scores at 116, 111. All three scores to the winner by unanimous decision. From the United Kingdom, the new unified heavyweight champion of the world.
There is a new era in heavyweight boxing. One of the biggest upsets in the last few years.
We're moving up to the top three now. The top three that have been put down on our list as fantastic, amazing performances from Brits abroad. And the next one on the list is from 1970, September the 26th, when Ken Buchanan took on Ismael Laguna in San Juan, Puerto Rico. At this point in time, the legendary Scot had only fought at British and European level, and before this fight, his only loss actually came on foreign soil against Miguel Velasquez in Spain. So he'd picked up a loss in his career. He was 36-1 at the time, going in against Ismael Laguna, 63-6-1. The referee refused to say how he marked the fight, after awarding Velasquez that points victory against Ken Buchanan, which is
a bit sus, isn't it?
a bit strange, really. Just a little bit strange. Now, later that year, he fought in the scorching heat of San Juan and beat the Panamanian legend and Roberto Duran hero Laguna in a close fight by split decision, which was 144-143 to Laguna and 144-143 and 145-144 to Buchanan. And I think what did it for him in this particular fight is the second half of the fight. And if anybody's already seen it, you'll know what we're talking about. For the benefit of the people that may have not have watched it, I think when you start to look into the second half of this fight, you start to see where Buchanan comes on stronger. And I think from about 6-7 rounds in, I think I was starting to look at it and think, actually, he's coming back here. Obviously, I already knew the result when watching it, because this was way before my time as well, but when watching it back, you start to really analyse how things went down, and as they come to the second half of the fight, that's where Ken Buchanan took over, really, and that's how he got that victory over Laguna in my eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the 12th round onwards, he pretty much he took the fight for me. I mean, in that heat as well in Puerto Rico, that's another element. You know, when you mentioned the Vasquez fight, I think that there's a good point to mention that, you know, that one defeat probably wasn't really a defeat. It was a close fight, but it was sort of given to the Spaniard. Whereas, so going into this fight against Laguna was a hero, a national hero. And although he had lost 6 fights, 63 wins, he was a well-accomplished world champion. And for Ken to go over there and do what he did, he had to win it convincingly, and I believe he did. And he took it from sort of, as you say, that the second half of the fight was all Ken Buchanan. He had him up at one point where he really liked he was going to stop him. He did go on to get the win. He ended up getting that close decision, which was just a magnificent win for, you know, I think it cements Ken Buchanan as the greatest ever Scottish fighter. If not, you know, he at least, if he isn't in the top 10 of the greatest British fighters of all time, I would say something's not quite right. For me, I think he just edges in there, 100%. And this is a real reason for it. And the fact is, I mean, the next crazy thing was he won the SAC lightweight title. We didn't actually pick up the WBA because Great Britain had this problem with the WBA where you couldn't fight, you couldn't defend the WBA lightweight or the WBA title with any weight on British soil. You had to fight overseas. So what he did was he made Madison Square Garden his new adoptive home, and that's where he defended his title against Laguna again. But this time he beat him quite convincingly in the Mecca of boxing. So this was a fabulous win for Ken Buchanan, and the fact that it was in Puerto Rico for me edges most fights, and the fact that it was against Laguna, who was an actual hero over there.
At number 2, we've gone for John H. Stracy, who was 42-3-1, who went over to Mexico City on December the 6th, 1975, and took on and defeated the great Jose Napoles, who was 81-6 at the time John H. Stracy went over there to fight him. Now, obviously, Jose Napoles, again, if you don't know him, go and look him up. Absolute fantastic fighter. The Cuban fighter. We know what the Cuban fighters and the system's like over there. He produces some amazing fighters. The Cuban was a dominant welterweight world champion for 4 years, but then he eventually had to move up to the middleweight division against the great Carlos Monzon for better competition, where he failed to answer the bell for the 7th round. This would be Napoles' last professional fight against the Londoner, who got off the floor in the 1st round to beat and cut Napoles so severely that the bout was stopped in the 6th in front of 60,000 people in attendance. So not only did John H. Stracy go over to Mexico City, the place where Napoles had kind of made his... Again, you said about Ken Buchanan, it was a little bit like Napoles' adoptive home. Even though he was a Cuban, he got a massive fan base in Mexico at the time, and people really were longing for a new champion in South America. You know, you had guys like Carlos Monzon, obviously, who he was talking about, and other fighters that were coming out at that around this time as well. And for John H. Stracy to go over there and beat up Napoles the way he did was absolutely unbelievable, and why we've picked it as our number 2 of greatest British performances abroad.
And I think the extra thing is as well is that, you know, Stracy was a Londoner. He's going over to Acapulco, you know, in heat. I mean, again, this is a major question. I think that's what many people believe. A bit like Buchanan, where, heat exhaustion was probably going to be an element more than anything. Whereas Jose Napoli's, obviously, he was confident, he fought there regularly. But, the fact was, Jose Napoli's was an absolute champion. I mean, this guy, if there was pound for pound list back then and we were running them out and it was social media out, Jose Napoli's would have been up in the top 2, top 3 comfortably. He was that much of a dominant welterweight. But to do it in front of 60,000, which were clearly room for Napoli's, it's just the earmark. In Mexico, John H. Jason must not have been able to believe just how much of a fantastic achievement. I mean, I dread to think. I mean, it must have been amazing for him. I mean, even Napoli's after was a bit, he was a bit of a spoiler as well. He came out and said because of the cut, he couldn't see, and he made a bundle of excuses saying if he could have knocked him out any round if it weren't for the cut. He was basically outclassed by John Stracey, and again an amazing performance from this Londoner, and it's just a great win for a Brit overseas.
Last but certainly not least, and the number one pick, I think by many people for a British fighter that's gone abroad and performed amazingly, is Lloyd Honeyghan, the ragamuffin man, 27-0, taking on Donald Curry, who was 25-0. And this was a fight where people considered it to be a complete mismatch. It was September the 27th, 1986. And it was that much of a mismatch, according to some bookmakers, that they refused to actually even issue a betting line on this particular fight. Now,
wow.
Lloyd Honeyghan was confident that he could go over there and beat Curry. And he actually was that confident that he bet $5,000 on himself at 5-1 odds. And then Curry defended the WBA, WBC and IBF welterweight titles in a shock defeat that was named the ring upset of the year for 1986. When Donald Curry returned to his corner after the 6th round with blood flowing down his face, and you look at the deep gash that's over his left eye, he just shook his head. And that's the amazing part about it. He just shook his head and turned around and told his corner, "I'm through." And they were the words he used. And that was it. And Lloyd Honeyghan literally beat the fight out of him to become the WBA, WBC and IBF welterweight champions of the world.
He's got to have that professional's care a bit now, Honeyghan. He's got this championship well within his grasp, and he mustn't make mistakes. And he looks so weary, shaking his head as he goes back to the corner there. And I'm wondering if it all could be over as the doctor comes in as well. And there's a lot of consternation there in the corner. You can see the referee looking over. And it looks as though they're sending for a second opinion. Another doctor coming in. As we look at the replay there, well, it may have been a head clash, who knows, that caused it. And he's become champion of the world, Honeyghan, and he's just thrown himself across the ring. Mickey Duff's lying on the floor with him. It is really incredible, because that is one of the biggest turn-ups, I'm going to say it, in the history of boxing, because Don Curry, let's face it, was unbeaten and looked unbeatable, and this fellow Lloyd Honeyghan from London really did the business in every way, and I've never seen such a joyous scene at an end of a fight as you will with that one.
We spoke about Jose Napoli's highly ranked and highly thought of. He was. Donald Curry was the same. He was an undisputed welterweight champion. I mean, an undisputed welterweight champion in today's game. But we're talking about Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. I mean, Lloyd Honeyghan, although undefeated 27-0, had not fought at this level. Nobody gave him a shot. Nobody gave him a chance. The betting lines were close. I mean, it's insane. He goes to stick $5,000 on himself at 5-1. I mean, he went in confident. That's brilliant. And this was just supposed to be another knockout. That's basically what it was. Donald Curry it was just a matter of him going in there, and it was just going to be Honeyghan was just going to be another victim for the Cobra. But he gave him a performance that, I mean, it is a brilliant performance. And I think you need to really understand what Donald Curry was about at the time, because when you watch it and you see Lloyd Honeyghan absolutely bash him up to the point where Donald Curry says, "I've had enough. I mean, I'm through." It just says to you just how magic that night was. And it was a real magical night, and one that I still can't put above anything else. I just think that is, I think many people will say it is the best. I mean, I know obviously we've had the Fury Wilder, which many believe was better than that. Not for me. Donald Curry was a machine, and a great win for Lloyd Honeyghan. The underdog. I love to see the underdog come for a win. We all do, especially when a Brit does it over in America. Great win.
No, it was a great win. Really, really great win. And that is why we've both voted for this as number one. And I think many people do have that as the number one pick for best British performance away from home. And obviously, there's so many more. We tried to encapsulate as many as we possibly could. So I've got a little list of a few here, which I think people will agree are great performances away from home. Joe Calzaghe went over to the Thomas and Mack Centre in Nevada and took on none other than I'll never let a white man beat me, Bernard Hopkins. Calzaghe, down in the opening round, managed to get off the canvas and win a split decision, which was a bit of a spoil fest of a fight from Bernard Hopkins' perspective, but an unbelievably great win for Joe Calzaghe, although people didn't really appreciate that victory at the time. And Joe Calzaghe is another guy we've done a career profile on, and I think if you've not heard our full in-depth career profile on Joe Calzaghe's super middleweight light heavyweight career, please go and check it out on that podcast. But this one then, Johnston, Joe Calzaghe, Bernard Hopkins, I think this is one of them fights that people didn't appreciate at the time because it was a little bit of a spoil fest. But then when you look at what Bernard Hopkins goes to do after this fight, I think that kind of makes me feel like this was more of an even greater win back then.
Oh, absolutely. And again, the time puts it into perspective. You know, what at the time you don't quite realise it, and then later on you realise how good even Bernard Hopkins was still, how good he still was at the time, and he was still having some great victories, and Joe Calzaghe going over to Thomas and Mack, you know. And the other problem with Calzaghe was everyone said he didn't travel. And he went over there, gets put down in the first round, and comes back to beat Bernard Hopkins. You can't knock it. All right, they were both at a bit of a rampage, but Bernard Hopkins was like a flipping fine wine. He just kept going. He just matured and got better. Calzaghe, obviously, I think this is his second to last fight, wasn't it? Was it before Jones Jr.? I think it was.
Yes.
Another good victory from Calzaghe that night as well. So he went out and he fought the two best in the light heavyweight division at the time. So yeah, great win for Joe Calzaghe. And the other one we've got in here is another guy that everybody thought, you know, first, when I think of Joe Calzaghe, unfortunately, Cole Froch does come to mind. And Cole Froch, Calzaghe didn't quite get it on, but he did a similar thing. He went over to America at Foxwoods Resort and Casino up in Connecticut, and he beat Jermaine Taylor on April 25th, 2009, which was a year after the Calzaghe-Bernard Hopkins fight. And it is one of the greatest comebacks of all time, really, especially from a British fighter. And Froch obviously stopped Taylor really late in that 12th round, that final round. We have done a Legendary Nights. Go and have a listen to it. It's a great listen and a great encounter. And I mean, you remember this one, Sean Fondley, didn't you, as well? Cole Froch, what a stunning finish that was, eh?
Taylor holding on. He ran out of gas. Froch, does he have it in him? Froch, Taylor staggering. They're ready to stop it. Froch, Taylor still on his feet. Under a minute to go. Froch again. Taylor, wild lunging punches, and he backs him up. Taylor trying to catch himself, using his jab, eats a right hand. Another right hand, and he goes down. Oh my goodness! 30 seconds left. Can the former world champion hold on? Taylor in trouble. Froch punches in bunches, and it's over. I'm going back to England, Mom, and I'm keeping my title.
Yeah, that finish from Carl Froch. The commentary, I think it's the commentary that kind of gets me going more than anything, is the American commentary that were covering it at the time, and they're just going nuts when Froch comes back, and it's like, and it's Froch, Froch, and I'm just like, this, you know, that's just amazing. Just the commentary does play a massive part in how we interpret and how we get excited for a fight. It certainly does, and that was no different. Carl Froch beating Jermaine Taylor there with only seconds to go on the clock, so that was an epic victory. And some people might have put that in their top 10 just because of how emphatic of a comeback it ended up being. So another one then is Colin Jones versus Hans-Henrik Palm in Copenhagen in Denmark on November the 5th, 1982. Colin Jones goes on to knock the European out inside only 2 rounds, picking up that great victory. So this is one probably more for the oldies, not for ourselves. This is before our time. Colin Jones knocking out Hans-Henrik Palm in Copenhagen. So one which kind of was probably around about the time as a young lad I was getting sort of pushed down the route of boxing. and it was when the great Nigel Benn went and took on Doug DeWitt at Caesars Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City on April the 29th, 1990. So we know Nigel Benn's style, we know he loves to scrap, we know he loves to take a few, to give a few, and in this particular fight, he was down in the second round. But he decides, you know what? When I go down, I get back up and I go and put the other guy down. And that is exactly what he did. And he goes and puts DeWitt down once in the third and 3 times in the 8th to win the WBO Super Middleweight title. He defended it in Las Vegas 4 months later in another terrific performance for a Brit overseas by going on to stop Iran Barkley in the first round. Also by 3-time knockdown rule, which, if you've not heard any of the stuff we've done on Nigel Benn, then I highly recommend, as always, you go and check out the Legendary Night series, because we've done one on Eubank and Ben, and we've done one on Ben and McClellan as well. So please go and check out the Legendary Nights podcast. But yeah, Johnston, Nigel Benn, Doug DeWitt, this is, like I say, around about the time as a young lad, really starting to get pushed into boxing, and another great fight and another great performance from British fighter away.
Yeah, and both them fights, we sort of had to stick them in there, because obviously Ben, on the back of that Watson defeat as well, he went to America to change his style, to try and become more of a boxer punch rather than just an all-out war machine. And looking at those 2 fights, he was basically just the same old Ben. But 2 great epic victories for Ben there. And yeah, I mean, the Doug DeWitt one probably edges it. It was a great night for him, and a great year for him for 1990. And then we move on to Jock McAvoy versus Eddie Babe Risco. And now this is an interesting one, because this is a non-title fight, and it was in December 1935. Now, Jock McAvoy his real name was actually Joseph Bamford, and he actually changed his name because back in these days they used to change their names to stop their mothers from finding out they were boxing. So that's why he was called Jock McAvoy. But at the end of the day, he knocked down a reigning middleweight champion ruler for 6 times. He knocked him down in the first round in a stoppage, but he never managed to get the rematch for the belt at stake. So unlucky for Jock. He didn't quite get that chance to fight Risco again, but another great win from a Brit overseas.
So another one then, again, one that's quite recent in my memory, David Hay, when he went and took on the giant Nikolai Valuev in Nuremberg in Germany, November the 7th, 2009. Hay beats the 7-foot giant via majority decision to become the WBA World Heavyweight Champion, successfully moving up from Cruiserweight after unifying the Cruiserweight division and winning that World Heavyweight Championship in what was a very calculated performance. It wasn't an exciting fight because obviously there was a massive difference between the two of them, of course, but Adam Booth, the master tactician in that corner and that night, had the right game plan for David Hay, and it worked a treat. And my memories of this particular fight will always be the final round of the fight, when after all that back and forward pot shotting from David Hay, just landing the shots and getting out, he manages to land a right hand on the chin of Valuev, which stumbles Valuev, and at one point you actually think to yourself, he's going down. And my memories of watching that fight was absolutely going bananas at the fact that I thought David Hay nearly had him down, and that was going to signify the end of the fight. But ultimately, he dominated that fight, and there's no way the Germans could have robbed this one from him.
No, and I remember him landing that haymaker as well in the last round. I sort of wished it was a couple of rounds sooner, because I think he would have probably got rid of Valuev. But 7 foot, I mean, the guy was an absolute monster. I mean, it's just incredible, really, the size of the fella. So, he wasn't as agile, and a good performance from David A. So moving on, we've got one of the Manchester and British heroes, and one of the greatest ever fighters Britain have ever produced, and of course that's Ricky Hatton. And this is the one where he fights Louis Colazzo at the TD Gardens in Boston, Massachusetts on May 13th, 2006. And this is the time when Hatton dipped his toes into the middleweight division. And although in those first 6 rounds he looked like he was pretty much comfortable, and then Colazzo came back at him in that latter stages of the fight and give him hell, and he ended up going on to win by unanimous decision. But it was an insight for Hatton, and just shows you that just jumping up that extra weight, coming from light welterweight up into the welterweight division, showed that the size difference obviously mattered. But it was good for Hatton. It was a good way obviously he did jump back down after, I think, for the next 3 fights, didn't he? After it was a real good fight and a good performance from Ricky out there.
It was a good performance for the majority of the fight, but the one thing it did show me, looking back on it now with hindsight, is that he was too small for the welterweight division, and he managed to get away with one really against Luis Collazo, because that second half of the fight, probably said the last 3 rounds of it, Luis Collazo was really, really putting it on him really hard. And at one point where he was getting through with some really clean shots, and I genuinely thought he was gonna put Hatton to sleep at that point, because he was landing quite heavily. And I think anybody else in the division, anybody that may have been slightly harder of a puncher than Luis Collazo was, and I'm telling you now, that would have been a disastrous night at the office for Ricky Hatton at that point in time. Obviously, we know about his career and where he was coming from at this point. He decided to move up, and we also know obviously what he went on to go and do in the sport. But this particular night is a performance from a Brit abroad, which, although it wasn't a stellar performance, it was a real ground out victory for Ricky Hatton that night.
He absolutely was. Absolutely. And he did grind it out and got the win. So, that's the main thing. Another one, which was an interesting one, because I think it gets forgotten because he has so many terrific fights, and that's Cole Froch against Arthur Abraham. Now, although Arthur Abraham was German, they did fight in Helsinki, Finland, which is a bit more close to him. He would have been a bit more comfortable in that environment, and Cole Froch had to go over there and put in a performance. And it was actually on November 27th, which was my birthday as well, in 2010. And Cole, I thought, was absolutely dominated Arthur Abraham, who was... Abraham was a classy fighter, and Cole made him look very ordinary that night. And I think it's one of Cole's best performances. He dominated him, he was classy, and he was just outstanding. And I do think he just gets overlooked with all the other victories with Groves and with Taylor, but this is one that we should fondly remember.
It was a bit of a miserable year for him, the early part of it, because he obviously had that big fight with Kessler, which was a really good fight, and then obviously after getting that loss, he decides to obviously come back as part of the Super 6 series and goes on to beat Arthur Abraham, which was probably his most dominant performance, as you rightly pointed out. I think with that performance there, I think he proved that he could match it with different styles, really. I think that was the difference here, is that he'd been in with all these different types of opponents, and Arthur Abraham was one there you expected to be able to come in and slug it out with Carl Froch, but he didn't, and he was quite static, and Carl Froch just dominated him with flurries of punches. So I think it was a really good display, and one of his underrated performances. I think people don't really talk about the Arthur Abraham performance too much, because they consider obviously the Groves fights and the Kessler fights to be the ones that define Carl Froch's career, but this is definitely one that you should go back and have a quick look at, just to sort of see what Carl Froch was like at adapting to different styles back then. So that was another one. Now, another one that missed out on the top 10 was James DeGale taking on Andre Durrell at the Agnanis Arena in Boston, Massachusetts on May the 23rd, 2015. Now, James DeGale, also known as Chunky, floored Durrell twice to win the IBF super middleweight strap. Later that year, he went on to defend it against Lucien Bute in Canada. So that particular year for James DeGale was James DeGale's defining year of his professional career, because he went on to win the world title, then went on to defend it, and both of them fights, the Durrell and Bute fights, were really, really tough fights, and I think it's, in my opinion, I think these were the two fights that took a hell of a lot out of him, following on with the Badou Jack fight. I think them 3 fights that James DeGale had between 2015 and 2016 were, for me, the fights that sort of finished DeGale, essentially. Each one of them took a piece of him out of their fights, and I think they were what led to him really declining in his career quite quickly.
I agree with you. I mean, this is the point where you not many British fighters as well went on the road. He was a bit of a road warrior at this time, wasn't he? He hadn't fought in Britain in this time for about 3 or 4 years, and he had fought in everyone's backyard, and he'd beaten them. And I think people don't really give him the respect, And Andre Durrell wasn't a fantastic fighter. He was a good fighter. But it was a very close fight, but he put him down twice, wins that title, and in the Bute fight in Canada, in his own backyard again, and beats him. And we all thought what Lucien Bute was about before he sort of stepped in the ring with Carl Froch. But, end of the day, that is a great, significant year for De Gea, and one that, again, you can't sort of just sweep under the carpet. It shows just how good he was. And I think another one, which I stuck on here, it's a close one. It was a very close fight, and many people may have gone the other way, but it was Cole Frampton against Leo Santa Cruz at the Barclays Centre in Brooklyn in July 2016, and Frampton won by majority decision to win the WBA featherweight title. And I think, again, that is a pinnacle time for Cole Frampton, and it was a great display from him against Leo Santa Cruz, who's still considered to be one of the best at the minute, although Cole, obviously, after the Warrington defeat, is sort of in a bit of a, I don't know, we don't really know what's happening with Cole at the minute. Is he coming back or isn't he? I don't know whether we should call it a day or not, we'll see. But a great win for Cole against Leo Santa Cruz before obviously going on to lose to him in the rematch.
Great performance from Carl Frampton that night. For me, that was Carl Frampton's career-defining performance. And I know you mentioned there, just briefly, about we don't know what's happening with him. Before, obviously, coronavirus took over the world, he was scheduled, well, it wasn't officially announced, but they were scheduling him to fight against Jamal Herring in Belfast. That was what was on the table, which would have been a great fight for the world title there. So that should hopefully still happen by the end of this year, 2020, and hopefully we'll get to see whether Carl Frampton has enough left to become a world champion once more, and I think it's quite possible he can do that. I'd just like to see whether he can or he can't, but this particular night that we're talking about, the Leo Santa Cruz night, was the one that I think, if he doesn't go on to win another world title, this is what he'll be remembered by, is this particular fight, him going over and winning a majority decision to win the WBA featherweight title.
Absolutely, and I kind of disagree with you at all there. I think 4 years ago now, hopefully he can find something. I mean, he did give Warrington a great fight. Warrington's at the peak of his career at the minute, so who knows, maybe he can pick up. I hope he does. I mean, I really do. And then one just late on the list, and it was a bit of an ad hoc, but it's a great win. And again, for a guy that fought at world level a couple of times, come up short, and finally got his chance, and that was dazzling Darren Barker. His win over Daniel Gill, and it was a really emotional watch, that, and it was in August 2013 at the Revel Resort in Atlantic City, and dazzling Darren somehow rose from his feet from that devastating body shot to win it on points. And that body shot, I thought it was all over. I'll be honest with you. I really weren't sure if Darren was going to do it. He gets up from that shot, and I was still expecting it to be finished. He fought on, wins on points, and it was for him personally, it is a major win and a great win for a British fighter again overseas.
That makes up the other ones that didn't get into the list that we put together, and I think it's now time to go into the final segment of this particular show, which is focused mainly on British fighters' performances abroad. And let's not forget about the nearly men, the men that tried so hard to either win a title or defend a title abroad and just came out unsuccessfully, or fighters where they would just go in against big names. Yeah, exactly. Like you took the words right out of my mouth there, legends. So let's talk about a few of them on the list then. So the first one we've got on our list is Randy Turpin versus Sugar Ray Robinson in their rematch in September 1951 at the Polo Grounds in New York. It was a very close one on the scorecards, and the referee was one round away from stopping it, but actually allowed Sugar Ray Robinson to continue, resulting in the pound-for-pound king stopping Turpin in round number 10. And again, little cheap plug yet again, it's Sugar Ray Robinson's career profile. We did it quite recently. You might have already listened to it, but if you haven't, please go and check out his career profile. Brilliant. It's a very long one, but it's a very enjoyable, factual one. So this fight also came up in that career profile. Randy Turpin, Sugar Ray Robinson. Obviously, putting a bit of context to it, Randy Turpin beat Sugar Ray Robinson to win the title, and this was the rematch, the one where Randy Turpin was so close to be able to defend that title, and the legend that was Sugar Ray Robinson just nicked it at the end.
Yes, he did. He was cut, and the referee was ready to call it because it was a bad cut. So he was giving him the extra round, and within that time, Turpin just couldn't stay away. He was a legend anyway. So Turpin did what he needs to, the bundle that night. So good on him. But this is the one. I mean, this is all overseas. Absolutely, every single fight we will discuss is all overseas. But there is one fight in particular that I can't help but throw in, and it is literally because it's against the greatest of all time, which is Muhammad Ali. And I know it's at Wembley Stadium. Obviously, Ali came here, but I just think this is such a pinnacle time for for British heavyweight boxing. It was Henry Cooper when he fought Cassius Clay, or Mohammed, that was his name at the time. And I just think it's something we need to just throw in, because the significance of this fight, and this is just a nearly, man. So, I mean, just imagine if Henry Cooper landed that Henry's hammer right on the button, right in the middle of the ring, and then Cassius Clay went down, and he didn't land on the ropes, and he was out for the count. What significance that would have had in British heavyweight boxing, especially, I mean, Henry Cooper was a legend anyway, but for that, I mean, it's the only reason why I threw it in there. It's just a thing I always think about, because he lived up the road from me in Bellingham, and he's just a guy I adore, and I just think he was just an absolute legend. And I just think, just imagine if he beat Cassius that night.
I bet that'd be a good episode to do, the episode of ifs and buts and what would have happened if this would have happened. Quite an interesting one to throw in there, a little bit of a curveball to throw in, and yeah, definitely a legendary moment. And although it didn't turn out the right way for Henry Cooper on that night, it certainly provided us one of the most memorable moments in boxing history. Of course it did. So, just moving on for a few more, we've got Howard Winston versus Vicente Saldívar in a rematch of 1967 in the high altitude of Mexico City. The Welshman lost a very close decision against the world-class southpaw. And this man comes up for a third time in the episode, Tyson Fury, yet again, in his first bout with Deontay Wilder at the Staples Center in Los Angeles on December the 1st, 2018. It's publicly well known what Tyson Fury came back from, and the way he brought himself back from the brink of despair to be able to go in against Deontay Wilder, the feared champion, and go in there and get a draw against him, which seemingly felt like a win. And I believe it was a win, and I know you believe it was a win, but it was one where I think what would have happened if Fury would have got the win that night, that's another what if, but it was obviously aligned to be in the stars that he would get that recognition for coming back from what he came back from, and then go on to do what he emphatically did earlier on this year.
Yeah, it has to go in there, because it's a nearly away win, because obviously it comes as a draw. It should have been a win. If he'd have got that and then done what he did in the second fight, I don't think we'd even be contemplating a third, because I think it would be pretty much all over. I don't see why Wilder would go there. Again, even the third one, still for me, I still don't quite get it, but it looks like it's still going to happen. But yeah, what Fury should have got that win. I mean, the other one for me, I remember watching the next one here, which is Martin Murray against Sergio Martinez in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and he lost in 2013 after knocking him down in the 8th as well. And I really thought that Murray won that. I mean, I know it's probably not a robbery such, but it was a tough one for Martin Murray to take, and I think he should have been given a nod on that night, but unfortunately he lost it to Sergio Martinez, who was an absolute legend.
I think the one that was worse than that was the one against Felix Sturm in December of 2011, where Murray picked up a controversial draw, and that was worse than the Martinez one. I think he won the fight against Felix Sturm for me. I mean, people think Martinez fight was an absolute robbery, but not so much more than the Felix Sturm fight. For me, I felt like he really did edge that fight, and he beat Felix Sturm. And Felix Sturm, obviously, being based in Germany, being German, everybody loved him in Germany, and no matter what you did with Felix Sturm over there, you just never be able to seem to get the decision against him. And this was another example of that, where Martin Murray went over there and seemingly put on probably his best performance, if not performance against Martinez. But for me, this was the night where Martin Murray should have become a world champion. And also, it happened to Matthew Macklin as well. In the summer of 2011, a few months before the Martin Murray Felix Sturm fight, Matthew Macklin was over there in Germany, in Cologne, lost a split decision, which was absolutely ludicrous. One of the worst robberies I've seen. It was worse than Martin Murray Felix Sturm. I think if you look at the two comparisons between the two fights, 6 months apart, if anybody out of them two that fought Felix Sturm should have won on their night, it was Matthew Macklin. He well and truly won that fight in 2011 and got absolutely shafted on the cards, and that world title would never get there for Matthew Macklin. That was the chance, that was his biggest opportunity, the biggest night of his life, and it was stolen from him. It was stolen from him by the judges on that night, unfortunately. And Matthew Macklin's a guy who you might not hear a lot about in any of our series-based podcasts, but we have got one particular fight that we urge you to go and listen to on the Legendary Nights series, and it's when he took on Jamie Moore in 2006 in one of the great British fights. Please go and check Macklin versus Moore, brilliant one. So there's only one more to go through now, Johnston.
Yes, and that was Pat Cowdell against Salvador Sanchez, and Pat Cowdell, I mean, it was unfortunate for him that he came up against two guys in a division that was, Salvador Sanchez and Azuma Nelson, and they're the two guys that he had to try and fight to win a title from. It's unfortunate, just somehow, sometimes when you find yourself in an era where you probably, if you threw him in today's division for the super featherweight division, he probably would pick up a world title, or featherweight division, he fought of both. So it was just unfortunate it happened, and this was one fight against Salvador Sanchez. Now, he did lose the fight at the Astrodome in Houston, but he did lose a split decision in a performance that basically showed he had pure class. And it was from this performance from Salvador Sanchez, although, as I say, he lost it when he got the Azuma Nelson fight. Just unfortunate. Sometimes you come up against two guys in your division that are just elite. So Pat Cowdell, who's a guy that not many will remember, but he's definitely, he's up there in the top 100 British fighters. Yeah, it was a unlucky one for him that night, but it's just one again. It was close. It was a close fight. I think Salvador Sanchez won the fight, but Pat Cowdell definitely deserves to be mentioned as a nearly man as well.
That concludes our nearly man segment for the episode, and I think that pretty much concludes this episode, really, of British performances abroad and some of the best ones. And if there's any that you feel that we've missed off there, then obviously you've got to let us know about them, because we would love to hear other people's interpretations of certain fights that maybe we've missed off. So if you drop us a tweet at BTR Boxing Pod once you've had a listen to this, and let us know if there's other ones that you could think of that would fall into that category, or any of the ones that we've put on this list that you think were absolutely fantastic, or you think were not as good as what we maybe made them out to be, then obviously just come at us and let us know. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this. Obviously, at the moment, it's a bit of a difficult time for many people, and there's just a lot of people scrambling to sort of put out very, very similar pieces of content. And I think what we decided to do with the podcast is, rather than try and bring you something that's pretty piss poor, we'd rather bring you something, even if it's only once every 3 to 4 weeks on the main feed, we'd rather bring you something that is actually going to be a topical subject to discuss and a good trip down memory lane. And I think this Brits Abroad episode that we've done is another one following on from our Fantasy Fights episode we did a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think, if anyone has any ideas as well, that you would like us to sort of dig into and dig through the archives, or something else we could try and bring for you to your ears. It is literally really difficult. It is tricky, isn't it, at this time, and we ain't getting no boxing, unfortunately. Let's just hope in the next month things change and we can start getting some events on, start getting back to normality for our own selves. And then hopefully we can start enjoying sport again in boxing and any other sport you're into as well as footballs and rugby, whatever. So yeah, just give us some feedback. Let us know what we missed out. I'm sure we missed one, Sean. I'm sure we did, mate.
I tell you what, there's that many of them to go through that. There's probably one or two that we've probably missed off, and people will be going, I can't believe these two have not even gone. Yeah, exactly. I know there'll be one. But obviously, if we have, guys, just let us know. We'd really appreciate all the support and the love we get from the listeners and the reviews and the retweets and the shares, everything that you're doing on social media for all the series. We really, really appreciate it, because all the hours that we spend doing it is for not just for our benefit, because we love doing it. It's because there's other people out there that we know it gives you the opportunity to have a little bit of an escape from reality, and I don't want to go too soppy on everyone with it, but it's a very difficult time, as Johnston was pointing out as well. Everybody's struggling, everybody's trying to get by. Some people have not got jobs at the moment and have been furloughed and have not got any type of income coming in, so we hope that it really, really does give some sort of an escape from reality for some people, and we really appreciate all the support that we're getting, and we hope that everybody is staying safe. We hope that everybody is trying to do the best they can with what they've got at the moment, and if this is something that takes your mind off it, even if it's only for an hour, then fantastic. We've done our job and we're really, really happy. And please let us know if it has, because nothing makes my day better than seeing a message from somebody that said, I've enjoyed listening to this because it's given me a bit of an escape, or it's given me something to focus on other than what's going on in the news at the moment. So yeah, it's been a good episode. I've really enjoyed it, Johnston. We like these little special episodes. So as you've rightly pointed out to the listeners, if there is any other subjects that you do want us to cover for the main feed, whilst we're going through this period of time at the moment where there isn't any boxing on a weekly basis, then please let us know and we'll definitely get something out to you as soon as we possibly can. So if you've not already subscribed to us, as always, come and check us out. All the podcasting apps out there, Apple, Google, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, Player FM. Go and subscribe to us. Get all the latest episode. Why don't you go back and check through some of the older episodes, some of the Life and Times episodes that I've done with the likes of Angel Manfredi and Chad Dawson and Ryan Rhodes, to name but a few. Go and check a few of them out. The Best Boxing Brawls episodes. If you've not heard them, go through the feed and find them, because they're all there for you to listen to. And they're great episodes. Go and give them a listen. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Brits Abroad. Thanks for listening, fight fans. Stay safe.